Good evening, all. My name is Subhashish Ghoshal, and I'm the director of TISED, the Trottier Institute for Sustainability in Engineering and Design. Welcome to the 9th Annual Symposium on Sustainable Engineering, Energy, and Design, hosted in partnership with the sister institution Institut de l'Énergie Trottier at École Polytechnique, and made possible by the generous support from Laurent Trottier and the Trottier Family Foundation. Since its inception in 2012, TISED has been deeply committed to building bridges between researchers, providing student training opportunities in sustainability in engineering and design, and engaging in public policy discussions. Over the years, the symposium event has been a forum for discussing pressing issues facing our society. In our past editions, we've explored questions surrounding renewable energy transition, decarbonization, sustainable cities, and more recently, what the pandemic could teach us about addressing the climate change disaster. Our theme for this year's event is centered around confronting climate change with design that is resilient by being rooted in nature-based solutions. And tonight, we will hear from two speakers, leaders in their respective fields, and bold ideas of how we can meet the moment and build a more resilient future. I hope you enjoy tonight's program. With that, I would like to turn things over to my colleague and TISED member, Professor Nick Luca, who holds a joint appointment at the Peter Guohua Fu School of Architecture and the School of Urban Planning at McGill University. Tonight, he'll be your MC. Professor Luca.
Thank you so much, Subhashish, and thank you to everyone watching. We're very glad you are joining us. I'm delighted to be speaking to you tonight on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and other peoples. Before we welcome our speakers, I'd like to just share a quick note on the structure of the evening. You'll first hear presentations from our two speakers, Henk Ovink and Marina Tabassum, joining us virtually from the Netherlands and Bangladesh, respectively. Their talks will be followed by a discussion and a Q&A period where we will have the chance to hear from our speakers on some of the questions that were submitted by our community. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Henk Ovink. He's a special envoy for international water affairs for the Kingdom of the Netherlands. He's responsible for advocating water awareness around the world, building institutional capacity and coalitions amongst governments, multilateral organizations, private sector actors, and non-governmental organizations. He is also Sherpa to the United Nations and World Bank High-Level Panel on Water, and Sherpa for the UN 2023 Conference on Water. Henk served on President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force and developed and led Rebuild by Design, the task force's Resilience Innovation Challenge. His book, Too Big, Rebuild by Design, a transformative approach to climate change, written together with Yelta Rohingya, explores his climate and water work for the Obama administration. Henk teaches at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, at the London School of Economics, and he holds a research position at the University of Groningen. His most recent initiative, Water as Leverage, was born out of his ceaseless drive and firm belief that the world can be changed through water and by design, leaving no one behind. We are thrilled that he is joining us tonight to share his vision of how we can and should build a more sustainable and resilient future. Henk, over to you.
Hello, I'm Henk Ovink, Special Envoy for International Water Affairs for the Kingdom of the Netherlands Happy to be with you and speaking at the Trottier Symposium for Sustainability in Engineering and Design. And I really want to thank the Institute TISED at the Faculty of Engineering at McGill University for inviting me to speak on the so important issues of climate and water, and look forward to the ongoing discussion. And thanks, Nick, for giving me the floor. So this is the blue marble. The image got world known after Apollo 17, 1972, took actually this first snapshot of planet Earth, showing, for one, of course, the amazing image of planet Earth, but also its vulnerability. There was no other planet, there was only one. At the same time, it was called the blue marble, not for nothing, because over 70% of the world's surface is covered in water. But now I take a big vacuum cleaner and I take all the water of the world off. And then all of a sudden, this is not a planet with big holes, doesn't become a Swiss cheese. No, it's actually the same sphere. And it turns out that water is only on the surface and therefore very scarce. If we add all the water up that we have, the sphere itself is not even the size of the US. And if you look close at the image, you see 3 spheres, and the smallest one, the 0.4% of all fresh water, is what we can use for human consumption, industry, and agriculture and food. So while we think there's actually a lot, water is actually very scarce. And we learned this also through the pandemic. And we know the images from across the world of wash your hands, but then knowing that over 2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water, over 3 to hygiene facilities, and over 4 to safe sanitation facilities, we know that water is not the first line of defense for too many around this planet. And it's not only water, it is water that is connected to everything else. If you look at climate, gender, conflict, urbanization, slums, the GDP gap, health, like we saw in the pandemic, if you add it all up, it aggregates to the level where communities are really, really vulnerable. And then if you take a disaster like climate or a pandemic, everything in those societies that are already vulnerable starts to fall apart. And climate is then the big disruptor. And we saw it, of course, in the years after 2018, 19, 20, 21 last year with main disasters. And again, we find ourselves now in one of the biggest heat waves that we've seen before. So we have a problem, but it won't help that these men, white, male, 50 plus, are going to deal with it. This is intergenerational. This is about everybody and everything. And it starts by embracing the complexity and really understand its capacity. Secretary General Guterres said this at a time, the time of hazardous risks and increasing complexity and geopolitical tensions and climate impact, where we have to also pause for science and solidarity. Have to take time to really reach out to the facts, understand the complexity, dare to embrace that, and reach out to the ones that are most vulnerable. Do it together. Science goes by facts, but solidarity also means trustworthy institutions, collaborations across societies and sectors beyond the vested interests, the silos we have. And if we want to understand climate challenges, we have the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that present us with reports that tell us how the risks are. And I want to focus on the middle one and behind the climate change and land. We, of course, in the Netherlands read the Oceans and Cryosphere report for sea level rise, since we're very vulnerable. And we saw the 1.5 degree, how important the Paris Agreement is, that we limit global warming towards 1.5 degree post-industrial levels. And we saw the climate change impact report also of this year. But climate change and land report tells us that close to 99% of all global investments actually increase climate change and make us more vulnerable. So everything we do ensures that there is more climate change, but at the same time, how we do it, how we plan our cities, how we develop, is actually making us more vulnerable. And this year's reports again laid out that the impacts of climate change means that adaptation and resiliency is as critical important as mitigation is. And of course, we know 1.5 degree is our best adaptation strategy, but even with a world that is heating up 1.5 degree post-industrial levels, you could say we ain't seen nothing yet. Protecting the most vulnerable in our society, but also in our environment, is going to be of critical importance in building resiliency across sectors and silos. We see the impacts of climate change through water. Most importantly, 90% of all natural disasters are water related, with floods and droughts hitting our societies across. And then it's in cities often where a lot of these challenges come together. It's where we live, it's where we move, it's also where everything is connected. And it turns out that while urbanization is spurring, going towards 75% later this century, we see that urbanization actually takes place faster in the places that are already vulnerable, on our coasts, in our deltas, and in the drylands of the planet. And there's a cost that is financial, because cities are hit hardest when it comes to climate impact, adding up to trillions of dollars a year, estimates by the World Bank and the OECD. There's also a cost when it comes to drought that actually has a rippling and crippling effect across our GDPs for years. But there's also a driver for inequality with these disasters. And it's the most vulnerable that they not only hit first, but also hardest, and have the hardest time to get back on their feet. So there's an economic risk, there's social and societal risk, there's a health risk that exacerbated by climate change. Poor water not only ruins us humans in society, but also our environment. And with that environmental loss, we see a massive decrease in biodiversity. Last year, we saw country overshoot days hitting the charts this year again. So that means that the future is before you know it, if we don't start to act differently, a dark place. And main reasons is that the business cases for the infrastructure of the past are there. And we validate everything we invest based on the principles and policies of the past. But there's no need for it. In 2015, we drafted an amazing agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals that you can't single out, but as a whole, present us with a comprehensive future. A future of peace and justice and equality, zero hunger, sustainable cities, and beyond. A future also where all those goals are interrelated and connected. A future also where a Paris Agreement is a driving force and a helping hand to underpin the realization of those goals. But if we continue on the path we have, if we continue on the road that we're heading with business as usual, it's not only not enough, it's becoming lethal and more lethal every day. So that means we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to move from non-responsive actions, moving from crisis to crisis, and even move beyond reactive actions, from crisis to temporary solutions, as we're doing now, where we're constantly responding to the current crises, to very proactive, using the Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as our horizon, the Paris Agreement as our horizon, a very comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable future. Developing solutions that are proactive, programs and practices that really help us spur change. And for that, water is a real lever, a lever that really helps us progress. And we need to invest in the people and in the enabling environment to get us to projects that are ready for implementation. And we too often think in projects and programs. We too often think in the billions we need to invest. But it starts with the people and their institutions that help us ensure novel solutions that really can help us spur forward. Science is clear, invest in the process, you maximize opportunities with higher performance. And it's through water that we actually are able to leverage the capacity of all those sustainable development goals. If you invest in water, you see it trickle down across every SDG. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and beyond. It is this complexity that, while complex, actually is the one we should embrace in approaches that really are based on long-term planning that looks ahead, that is comprehensive, connected to short-term innovative solutions, developed and implemented in a very inclusive way, leaving no one behind, but also with transparency and accountability for the business cases that are better and the validation and evaluation of the things we do, but also to build up capacity that is institutional as well as individual in our most informal and formal setting. And to drive this agenda of a long-term comprehensive approach with short-term innovative actions to spur sustainable development, now we need design. Because design, planning, and innovation are the drivers and catalysts for that. Design is solution-oriented. It's innovative, catalytic, and pragmatic. So it drives our opportunities. While at the same time, design has the capacity to connect. It connects across scale, across time and interest. And design tells a story. It helps us understand a future we want, that is possible. It is political through its aspirations and inspiration. And that is the reason why we need design to help us leapfrog towards a future that we all want. But the process of design is not easy. For that, you need time and space. Like Secretary General Guterres said, time for solidarity and science. We need to be able to invest in each other. Science calls this soft space, a space where outside of the lock-in of vested interest, we can invest in each other. And that space is going to be of critical importance if we want to progress the challenges, across the challenges and opportunities that we currently face. Now, in my work around the world, it's exactly this soft space that stands forward, being it in diplomacy, where countries or partners are in conflict, being it in zones of post-disaster, where within those disaster zones, we actually see the opportunity to not only build back, but build back a lot better. And I witnessed this, for instance, post-Hurricane Sandy, when there is a momentum to grasp, to really look forward. Hurricane Sandy hit the New York East Coast now almost 10 years ago. And it left a disastrous image of that region with too many casualties, vulnerabilities, and the damage adding up to over $60 billion. It also showed not only the vulnerability of infrastructure and an investment, having 75% of the power supply in the floodplain and 80% of fuel storage in that same floodplain. It also showed the divide in society. The most vulnerable, as said, were hit hardest here. And as you see on this map is where it's purple, where blue, water, and red, vulnerable, come together. It's where the most vulnerable were hit hard. Manhattan was struck in this poor infrastructure. One power plant by Con Ed went out, and half of Manhattan without electricity, except for the haves you can see here in the financial district up front. With my Harvard student, we did an assessment on poor governance, showcasing that every place in this sandy hit region has a different level of governance when it comes to planning, designing, and implementation. And post the disaster, that fragmentation is another disaster on top of that. So poor capacity at the local, regional level, and poor ways of collaborations across those institutions, a distrust in society that goes and went all the way through the institutional level, where the Port Authority was totally dysfunctional, and a very ambitious president, and a Congress that agreed across the aisle to invest $60 billion in the rebuilding of the Sandy region. And President Obama was clear from the beginning when he started as a president: no Katrina on my watch, meaning no federal government that doesn't know what to do. So he asked Secretaries Donovan and Napolitano to come up with a new federal disaster response framework. And that response framework actually helped us install the President Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. The task force tasked to deal with the $60 billion, headed by Sean Donovan, a man with boots on the ground, a clear mind, a plan, and the intelligence of both planning and politics. Knowing that ambition, still there is the divide. And if this mix of leadership at the highest level and a comprehensive approach with such a task force cutting across all sectors and silos, not only in the federal government, but across society, still has to be matched with the local needs, the despair on the ground. This image was found somewhere along the Jersey Shore, where the person who painted this on the wall really lost everything. And the hatred, therefore, is real. And that hatred is hard to match with a federal response task force that comes in and says, hey, the disaster just happened. Let's just see it as an opportunity. So the inclusivity then becomes something that has real meaning, where the connection between policymakers and designers and planners, between politicians with ambitions, investors, public and private, coming together really has to be on how do you touch the ground? How do you engage? How do you build a partnership that is real, where continuity, consistency, and commitment are building trust and not increasing the distrust we have. Luckily, of course, with President Obama, that trust was empowered. And I had the honor to serve on his task force. And next to the repair and the rebuilding of the critical infrastructure, looking after the most vulnerable first in the numbers we had, we also discussed how to move forward, how to become, as said, not reactive or non-responsive, but proactive. How could we use the future as an example, as a reference for the things we could do? And based on that, I developed Rebuild by Design, a competition that started first in creating this safe space, a place to come together where stakeholders from across all sectors, silos, in large coalitions of teams were brought together, challenged in a competition, not to compete against each other, but to the highest standard, to work together on a research identifying vulnerabilities, interdependencies, and opportunities, and help develop and design with local communities those projects that really could be catalytic. In 9 months, the teams did the research, built the coalitions, and worked on 10 powerful plans across the region that reached from fixing the swamp to become a sponge again, with a healthy environment to play and for biodiversity, but also to deal with flood risks in the Meadowlands. Perpendicular rivers used as room for the rivers, creating the opportunity to be able to deal with the surges, but also rain events, and create healthy environments for the communities across. Building a barrier alongside Manhattan, not as a wall, but as a community-led engagement opportunity where parks, walls, buildings, and public space interact and actually become the first line of defense that was so much needed. In Hoboken, across the Hudson, not developing reactive infrastructure repair, but a proactive planning, a plan that dealt with the resist of the water in green and blue solutions, delaying the water in the city itself by greening it, and therefore not only dealing with climate adaptation, but also with mitigation, store the water and make sure that it could be discharged. And in the Hunts Point food market, unprotected in the context of Hurricane Sandy, a food market where the whole of New York is dependent on, working with the most vulnerable community in this region and the food market partners to develop a suite of interventions that build with nature resiliency structures across Hunts Point. And then on Staten Island's living breakwaters that are being implemented right now as we speak, that not only protect the shore and coastline of Staten Island, but actually help restore the biodiversity and ecosystem of the ocean and create a safe space for swimming and recreation. Of the 10 plans, we awarded 6 + 1 with federal development dollars, but on top of that, developed a national disaster resiliency competition for any state that was hit by a federal disasters in the year ahead. Thinking about adaptation, we know these disasters were, these plans were post-disaster. We cleaned up the mess in a very good way. This was Sandy, we did it in Peru and in many other places. But we know preparedness pays. It actually pays off. The Global Center on Adaptation calculated that we need in 1.5 trillion in 5 areas from 2020 to 2030 that could generate $7.1 trillion in total net benefits. So there's a 1 to 4, 1 to 5, sometimes 1 to 6 dividend when it comes to resiliency and investment. Bringing that resiliency framework forward is what we did to Africa with the help of USAID and the Rockefeller Foundation. But we also brought it to the Bay Area and San Francisco with a competition, again, inspired by Rebuild by Design, called Resilient by Design. Looking with 9 teams across the region in these communities, developing plans that in total added up to a comprehensive strategy for the whole Bay. driving not only resiliency for communities, but also politics and planning until today. That thinking of being proactive, looking at the future as our best reference, and using design, coalitions, capacities, and leadership across all layers and sectors of society, bringing in international expertise to the very local, is what we have to do in every place to reinvent ourselves. That's also what I developed and we're implementing now in Asia, a region perhaps most vulnerable when it comes to climate change impact. Water as leverage, using water as a way to drive catalytic change for sustainable development and climate action, is how we used the framing. We assessed water-related risks in this region and identified the hotspots, identifying over 30 cities in this region where we could start. We picked 3 to start: Chennai in India, Khulna in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia. And in those places, working with communities, we shied away from a step-by-step approach that would lead to failing infrastructure, to, again, creating this soft space of partnership, bringing communities, experts, local, national, and international together to understand vulnerabilities and their complexity and interdependency, and develop solutions that become the catalyst for the change so much needed. 6 teams were selected, working in these 3 cities. And I show you some of the examples here in Chennai, where the canals are polluted and no longer function to ensure that there's a stable water system. Chennai, a water scarce city sometimes, but not when you look at the facts. There's enough rainfall, but it falls in a very short period of time. And because of urbanization and the lack of capacity in the infrastructure to carry the water back into the aquifer and clean and make sure that you can use and reuse it, it flows polluted to the sea. Knowing that there's population growth and economic demand with an increased demand for water, desalination plants are being built that cost billions, but also have large carbon footprints. And when that water is produced, then it has to be trucked or pumped across the city. So that means there is a scarcity system that is actually even provoked or strengthened by, this single focused stupid infrastructure. But if you look at it closely, you see a circular opportunity, an approach where you can capture the water again, like in the old days, where the land was able and capable, thanks to human interventions, to capture the water and bring it back into the aquifer. In religious ponds and tanks, all the way to little dams in the landscape. Bringing that back means bringing back the opportunity to overcome this pollution with nature-based solutions: flood prevention, drought prevention, sanitation, and an improved urban environment. By restoring these historic tanks, building new ones, focusing on reforestation and renaturalization of rivers and canals, develop bioswales and build constructed wetlands and restore the ones that we lost, and focus on a mix of solid and liquid waste recycling and adapt our building. If we do this across, we can use the power of the culture and the values of water again to rethink how we could build water resilient cities here in Chennai. And then investing in water does trickle down across all sustainable development. We have improved urban environment, we build flood resiliency, focus on sanitation with better health and better nature and biodiversity, create opportunities for businesses while again restoring the past, cutting down massively on carbon and improve our urban environment. This carbon emission this cut is massive, but also focusing on nature-based solutions. There's a reduction in cost, both in the implementation as well as in the maintenance and operation. Right now, we developed this project with the school as a first exemplary project and program to not only bring back water into the aquifer, show how we can clean it, but also make sure that the school has fresh water and good sanitation facilities, and that there is a center for the neighborhoods to learn about the values and power of water as a starting point, a catalyst to spur climate and water-related action. In Semarang and Khulna, we did more or less the same with very tailor-made. We see a sinking city in Samara, taking the water out, groundwater becoming more saline, channels, rivers that are channeled up. So the water flows to the sea, therefore it can't be used. Rethinking that whole system with the city's teams was really about creating opportunities for rechanneling the city, looking at opportunities and the co-benefits of investing in water, and developing solutions in the kampungs, on the mountains, in the industries, and across the coast. And in Kulna, where water is a threat, but also an opportunity, we started by looking at the bigger scale system in this amazing delta Bangladesh has, and focusing on the different scales of bringing back the opportunity of using the investment in water to leapfrog towards a water-sensitive city. Water as Leverage is a program that's been implemented now in these 3 cities and scaled to Vietnam, other places in India, Colombia, Africa, and Europe. It got rewarded, but that is not so important. But it can be an inspiration on how we can use design, planning, and innovation, and the partnership that come with it as a way to progress forward. And we have no time to it. We need these approaches, these partnerships to really scale up everything we have. We have to step up and build commitment for that future. That is also why next year, for the first time in 46 years, at the UN, we will host the second ever, first in 46 years, UN Conference on Water. A conference that is co-chaired by the government of Tajikistan and the Netherlands, where we want to put every water action on the table. This is not a conference about talk and an agreement. This is a conference based on the agreements we have, the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, that we really want to invest in the solutions, the commitments and partnerships, and scale them up, replicate for reinventing the path for the future across all levels, scales, interests, institutions, and coalitions. The UN 2023 Water Conference gives us the momentum to bring all our commitments to the table, commitments that are needed to do the work we have to do. Will this be easy? No, because there are no silver bullets when we talk about sustainable development and climate action. But this is necessary? Yes, it is a necessity. It is a necessity for us, for our planet, and future generations. Secretary General Guterres is very clear. We have to step our efforts. We have to turbocharge the SDGs. It is on us. It is our vulnerability. We have to change course now. And we can. And if we look at future generations, there is hope. These 2 girls live in Samara, and the little one has a cap, and it says future doctor. And there are 3 reasons why she wears the cap. 1, she wants to go to school and learn and educate herself. 2nd, she wants to be a doctor to take care of others, leaving no one behind. This scientist in her also is really about social value. But the 3rd is she believes in a future where it's worthwhile taking care of people. We can be inspired by her and use water as a lever for the sustainable development and climate action we so much need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henk, for that insightful and engaging presentation, reminding us about the preciousness of water on our blue marble, the abundance of which is easy to take for granted, especially here in Canada. We do indeed need to focus on soft spaces for science and solidarity. This is, of course, a cross-cultural, cross-institutional project, what we in Quebec sometimes call a projet de société. Enabling environments and proactive actions, investing in processes, scalability, these are all vital, and I look forward to continuing this conversation later in the evening during the question and answer period. I especially like talking about design as the capacity to connect across scales and across interests, and that is, of course, a political endeavor. This makes me especially pleased to welcome our second speaker tonight, Marina Tabassum. She is Bangladeshi and an architect and educator, as well as the founder of the Dhaka-based Marina Tabassum Architects. In her work, Marina seeks to establish a language of architecture that is contemporary, yet reflectively rooted to place, always in dialogue, in an ecological rubric containing climate, context, culture, and history. She has also taught at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, but as well she has taught at the Technical University of Delft, the University of Texas, and the Bengal Institute. She has received an honorary doctorate from the Technical University of Munich. Marina has won a number of awards, including the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, the Arnold W. Brunner Memorial Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Gold Medal of the French Academy of Architecture, and the Soane Medal in Architecture from the United Kingdom. In 2022, after the start of the pandemic, Marina established a new nonprofit branch of her practice, the Foundation for Architecture and Community Equity, or FACE, the goal of which is to provide a home and a humane living environment for ultra-low income groups, the landless, or climate victims. We are delighted that she can be with us tonight to speak about her work on the front lines of climate change. Marina, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marina Tabassum. I'm the founder and principal of Marina Tabassum Architects, a Dhaka-based practice in Bangladesh. I'm also heading the Foundation for Architecture and Community Equity. It's a platform for architects that look into the marginalized population, getting them ready for the climate crisis. So my office is called Marina Tabassum Architects. I'd like to start with the issues that are most pressing at the point in time in our lives. These two crises where we have our climate burning, and of course the crisis of COVID, which has kept us under a lot of different regimens for the last 2 years and another one running. And while we were going through this COVID crisis and having these climate issues, I think a lot of things are coming clear into picture now about the things that has gone wrong, the imbalance that was created, the overproduction, the balance disrupted and everything. And with that, being in Bangladesh, we are facing a lot of crisis. And I think it's a time for all of us, architects, allied professionals, engineers, everybody who's involved in this industry of construction and building, and others also, to bring our focus more towards nature and bringing the balance back instead of being the focus ourselves. And Bangladesh, in my case, is facing the impact of climate crisis. It's already evident, it's already there. Our sea level is rising. And because of that, you can see different issues that are arising, especially regarding the biodiversity, the ecology, the changes in the climate, the heavy rainfalls, the glacial water coming down from the Himalayas, creating this flooding, and the flooding is becoming much more disruptive and much more unpredictable. So there are all these issues that are really coming to focus. Just to give a little background on Bangladesh, Bangladesh is actually created by the Ganges Delta. It's these large, mighty rivers that are coming down from the Himalayas, which is one is Brahmaputra, the other one is the Ganges. These two rivers converge into the Bay of Bengal and creates this land, which is Bangladesh. And the entire country, if you look at it, is crisscrossed by a network of river bodies, waters, and different kinds of water bodies. And so basically water, it's mainly a waterscape rather than a landscape. And this water system is coming into different kind of questions. One major issue is the erosion that you see here in the image of 20 years of movement of the rivers. And you can see how the river is eroding the banks as it changes its courses, and new sandbeds form within the riverbeds. And this is a unique phenomena of the Ganges Delta. And in reality, what you see on the ground is that the soft, fragile soil, which is silts accumulated over hundreds and hundreds of years, brought in by the rivers from Himalayas, this silted soft soil completely erodes as the river current becomes much more harder during the monsoon season, as the glacial water and the rainwater comes down from the Himalayas. And it has caused a lot of crisis. A lot of houses have been eroded. In a number of small towns, villages has been washed away by the rivers. And so it has rendered a lot of people homeless. It has created a lot of crisis around these areas of the coastal areas and along the riverbeds, riverbanks. And so this is one major issue where you find a lot of people losing their home and becoming landless and moving to the city. So these are climate migrants who needs attention. And on the other hand, we have these sandbeds that form in the middle of the river, because these are silt brought in by the waterways from the Himalayas, and the silt slowly sediments during the dry season when there is low current, and especially because of the tidal dominance of the Ganges Delta. So these sandbeds form in the middle of the river, which is actually, in a way, a blessing for the landless people, because they come and start staying in these spaces, occupying these sandbeds as their home. But there is no fixed idea that this sandbed will remain. So this is there for maybe 2 years, 3 years, and then it can wash away again at some point in time. And so in these areas along the river of Ganges, Podda, and Brahmaputra, you'll find these housing pattern, which is the vernacular houses for the last 200 or more years, where they have this wooden frame structure and facades, so everything can be knocked down. So when there is a chance of a river taking away land, or there is a chance of erosion, people generally take their houses down and move it to a safer location. So these are mobile flat pack systems that the entire area of people have adapted as a vernacular way of living. And in the markets, you'll find these houses being sold. So these are very modular structures, which can be found in different areas along the rivers where they sell these houses. And it can vary from different, the cost varies from $4,000 to, let's say, $6,000. There are even some which can be bought by $2,000 also, depending on the material, the size, and everything. And so basically, these are houses for, let's say, middle-income families who can afford the houses. But for the lower-income families, these houses are not affordable, especially for the landless people. So these houses were a part of our research, and we took the houses to Sharjah in UAE, where we were invited by the Sharjah Architecture Triennial to do some research on the coastal area and the movement of this land and how the inheritance happens in these areas. So basically, based on that, what you see here on the left side is the houses in their own context, and these houses, again, in the context of Sharjah, where we were given a courtyard in the venue. And so we bought 3 houses and we took it there. These are beautifully made, well-crafted houses, which are, again, a mobile system invented by the locals as vernacular system. And our research was also showcased within these buildings. So this is just to share. And during the pandemic of 2020, when we were all locked down and we were staying home, there was no way of going to office. We decided to work on an idea of how we can create a modular mobile structure as a house, which can be low cost and can be given to the people who are living in the sandbeds, who has nothing, who basically live off the land. And these are the people who are actually victimized by the climate crisis. And that's why we thought that this is a solution that would be for these people. And so what we did is we tried to work out a solution. Here you can see a space frame structure, basically made out of bamboo. to make it low cost and lightweight. And then it has these corner joints, which are made out of steel. So here you see all the different components. And then we have a roof. And there are 2 levels. And the reason is that if there is a flooding, they can move to the upper deck and save themselves from the flood water. And also, if there is river erosion, they can take the building down, knock it down as a flat pack system and move it to a safer location. So, and the first prototype we built again. So this is a system, what we call Kudibari. Kudibari is the name of the project, and this is a very unique painting of one of our painters of Bangladesh, SM Sultan, and we decided to put some of our Kudibaris on the image just to portray that this can become a part of the vernacular also. So these are some of the renderings that shows how we envisioned this whole idea of Kudibari, how it can become a cluster of community. And during the flooding, this can also have the upper level being used to save people and their belongings. This can also be taken to maybe a city or somewhere where the lower part could be used as a shop or a restaurant, and the upper floor could be used as a residential facility where people can sleep at night. So these are different illustrations that we created. And this is the first prototype that we built in Dhaka during the pandemic of 2020. And once we built one of these prototypes, we understood that this is a possibility that could really work well for the villagers. And so we decided that we should now test it on ground. And so this is our first trip to the shores or the sandbeds. And so here you see in the Google image, the area which we focused on. It's in the middle of the Meghna River, which is one of the largest rivers that's going down into the Bay of Bengal. So from Dhaka, you need to take a boat like this, which takes us to the mainland. And from the mainland, then we have to take a smaller boat. And that smaller boat then goes to these areas, which is the sandbeds in the middle of the river. And so this is what the sandbed actually looks like. And these are enormous rivers. Here, what you see are 2 sandbeds, and the main river is actually in the horizon, the line right there that you can see. There's a small ship that actually goes from the Bay of Bengal towards Dhaka. And so here we tried out our first house. And just to understand the context, there's nothing, there's no electricity, no running water, no toilet facility. There's absolutely nothing. So the entire team of architects who worked on this project had to go there, camp, and build up a relationship with the local community and start to build the process. And so this is our first project that we built for a small family of 3, a husband, wife, and a young child. And so this is a single module house where, as you can see, the lower ground is empty. The idea is that the people will create a facade of their own in the lower level. And in this area, especially in these sandbeds, there's hardly any material to build with. So we could get this grass, this tall grass that grows in the sandbeds. So we take the tall grass, which is also something that's used by the locals to build their own houses, and we use that as a facade. So here we have a house and toilet facility that was built. And this is another house of 2 module structure. So this is a scalable idea where you can add number of modules, and this in turn becomes a house which could be enlarged. So this is a house for a family of 4 children and a husband and wife, so altogether 6. And so we have 2 modules here. And here you can see the construction technique, how the bamboos, these are structural bamboo, are joining with steel joints, and then the entire structure is being created. And it's a very simple, easy to erect system with only bolts, and that could also be very easily taken down. So this is the second house with 2 modules where we have the upper deck for sleeping area and the lower part for the family to occupy. So what they did is they just made this facade with tall grass and created this ground level and enclosing it as their house. So these are some of the details where you can see how the tall grass is being used as a facade material, the stair and the steel joints. So once they built the entire house, basically the lower level is something like that, where you can keep your clothes. In some houses, they have the bed down there and the stair goes up. And for the children, it's interesting that they get the first time to see the horizon or look into the river. So it's quite fascinating to see them and their movement. So entire project that we do, and especially in these areas, are done by architects. So it's all architects and a few engineers and also carpenters who come together and build these structures. Now to move to another location. So what we did after building these houses in the sand beds in the lower part or the coastal part of Bangladesh, we got a fund from the Swiss government, and with which we are now building about 100 houses in different locations of Bangladesh. So we wanted to try out another location, which is the wetlands of Sylhet. And this is right next to the Indian border. As you can see here, the Indian border. And the yellow line right here shows the foothills of the Assam hills. And in fact, the Meghalaya, the highest rainfall area, which is Cherrapunji, highest rainfall of the entire world is Cherrapunji. And all the water from Cherrapunji actually comes and gets collected in these areas of Bangladesh before it flows into the Bay of Bengal through the rivers. So this area is entirely wetland. So during the monsoon season, this becomes completely inundated in water. And during the dry season, as the water recedes, this becomes a place where generally people do their cultivation, especially mostly rice cultivation. So this long line that you see here as a piece of a land, it's actually man-made. So it's a man-made embankment on which they generally create their own houses. Here you can see at the back is the Meghalayan hills, which is India, and this is the Bangladeshi part. And one of our kudibar is standing right there. And so this is during the dry season when there is no water, and you can see that people generally graze their domestic animals, and also they cultivate rice. And that's the same area during the monsoon season when it's completely underwater as the rainfall happens and all the water comes down from the hills and uses this wetland and becomes completely inundated. So I just want to show you a small video here which shows the process. So basically, I think it's quite evident from the film, the way the process goes. We have a leaflet that shows the entire construction technique and the possibilities that this structure has, and then talking to the communities, creating map, engaging with them, also making models. So basically, it's a process where we engage the community, and the community base then in turn becomes a part of the entire process and helps the construction technique and everything. We have the local carpenters who also joins the team, and so basically to share knowledge and to transfer the knowledge that we have been able to acquire through our process of construction of these houses, and then slowly we go into the process. So here you've already seen some of the houses that were built in this area. Interestingly, we had a flood very recently. This is the same house, in fact, where you see this embankment, which is done with these sandbags. And that's when the river, the water level was low. And the picture on the right side shows how the water level has actually risen and now has come up to a certain height. So basically, we had a flooding very recently in these areas, which inundated the entire area that you just saw in the film. And most of the houses were completely washed away in many cases. But the houses that we've built about 15 houses in this area. And all the houses were able to withstand the flood. And not only did it give a refuge to the people who own the houses or the homeowners, but also their neighbors. So the upper deck really helped them. So here you can see the level of water at this moment here now. So lastly, I'd like to share with you one of our very recent projects, again, done in 2020, 2021. Basically, these are some of the facilities for the Rohingya refugees. As you know, that Bangladesh hosts about 1 million Rohingya refugees. These refugees have come to Bangladesh starting from the 90s, but the main exodus of refugees happened in 2017 during this crisis where the Rohingyas were being killed through genocide and ethnic cleansing by the Myanmar army. And so they had to fled, and Bangladesh shares a border with the Rakhine state here of the Myanmar. So basically, that's where the Bangladesh border refugees crossed the Bangladesh border and came to the place called Cox's Bazar. And here we have about 1 million refugees living in a place called Ukhia and Teknaf. So these are one of the most densest refugee shelters in the world. And the maps, if you see, these are all the refugee shelters that's occupying in this area. That's one of the largest camps in the world. So when the refugees came in Bangladesh, they needed to be hosted to a certain area. So this is the place here in the map you see in 2002 used to be a forest land. And that same area in 2017, all the trees were cut and to make shelter for the refugees. And for nearly 60,000 at that time, needed an enormous amount of facilities. So the network, infrastructure, everything, road network, and all of that, of housing and food and everything. So this entire forest was cut to make space, to make new roads. And so as you can see in these images right here, all these facilities were being created. And so now the Bangladesh government has a mandate that they want to reforest these areas where the refugees are living. So one of our projects, which was from the World Food Programme, was to work with the refugees to create these reforestation efforts. So again, the methodology we generally use is we get into a certain kind of dialogue and engagement, community engagement with the refugees, as you can see here. Where we talk about garden, we talk about environment and why it's important to have trees for the macroclimate of that area and the microclimate that it generates, the heat that's there, and the landslide that happens during the monsoon season. So to combat all of that, we need reforestation. So all these deforestation efforts were in place. We have native plant lists. So from there, we had to choose plants. And we tried different kind of techniques like bamboo nailing. And we've also done a lot of mud ball techniques. We've taken forest floor from the other forest areas which are surrounding this place, and then brought it to regenerate the forest floor. So these are some of the activities that we've done. So one of our work was to engage with the community while we were also designing some of the facilities for the refugees and the communities who are living around the refugee camps, the Bangladeshis, who are known as the host communities. So these are some of the workshops that we had with this is in this case, in this image, you see the host community where we are working on a hands-on building workshop. And through the hands-on building workshop, we've built a house for ourselves to go and stay there. So this is a house for the MTA or the Marina Tabassum architects staff who goes and works in the refugee camps. And this is done, this house is actually done with the same technique as Kudibari, as you can see here. So we thought, if this is a house we can give to the people in different locations, this is a house where we can also stay. So basically, we created that house with the local community here in Cox's Bazar. And that's the house where we live. So the lower level is our office where we work during the daytime, and the evening we sleep on the upper deck, which is more like our bedroom space. So you can see in the image here. So this is an entirely built with bamboo structure because bamboo is the only material that's allowed in the refugee camps. So we tried out the material to be able to understand and to be able to recreate these structures. So here's the team of our architects and engineer carpenters who work in the camp, and we generally go and stay in the house that we have built for ourselves right outside the campground. And in the camps, we are now building women-friendly centers, women-led community center, disability centers, all different kinds of facilities for the refugees, child-friendly spaces. And so, again, the same technique where we work with the refugees, we understand their aspirations. So these are all community engagements where they also take part in creating the program of the building facilities. And then we make models with them. And then through that, we create a program. And then all the building designs are then goes into action. So basically, it's a community-led participation or community engaged through which people become a part of the system. And there's a sense of ownership when they build something. So this is one of the aggregation centers that we've built for the local community, the host community, where women farmers bring their produce, fresh produce, and sell. So this is the lower level, again, built with bamboo because that's the only material that's used in that area. So we use the same technique of bamboo and steel joints, and we created the lower floor is for the selling of their fresh produce, while on the upper floor is more for themselves to engage in conversation with all the women farmers. So this is during the activity of selling and the bazaar day, let's say, where women bring all their produces. So this is an income generation, a livelihood program, also run by the World Food Program. These people, especially these local communities, have lost their livelihood because of the exodus of the refugees. So the World Food Program also creates a job for them so that they're able to make their livelihood. So this is the upper floor as you go up the stairs, and this floor is mostly for the women to occupy and to learn from themselves what kind of aggregation and agriculture that they can work on. So basically, that's again another project. I'm going to go back here. So these are the two projects that I wanted to share with you today. Looking forward to a lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for your inspiring talk, providing with vivid evidence of the impacts of the climate crisis and COVID on those living really on the frontiers of climate change. I'm humbled to see what your team has been able to accomplish to address some of the challenges these families are facing, and also in the inspirational message of making nature the focus again. All of us working in architecture can certainly appreciate how you took inspiration from modular and vernacular antecedents on which you've literally been building the Kudibari initiative. So we now move on to the final part of our event, the question and answer period, where we allow members of our community to become part of the discussion. We asked our viewers to submit questions to our speakers ahead of our event, and we received many inquiries. So why don't we jump right into that conversation? Marina, perhaps I will start with you. And as someone who works a lot in community engagement, I know that it's inspiring, but it's also challenging. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how we can engage so many diverse stakeholders and diverse publics, different sorts of communities. And this is very much a question of scale, which reaches back into one of the main points that Henk was making as well.
Right. Well, engaging with community perhaps is one of the most important and the most challenging part of this whole process, because, it's about the people we work with, the stakeholders, let's say. They're not aware of the climate issues or the climate crisis that's happening. They just take it as a phenomena. Okay, this year we had a bigger rain. Next year it won't be the same, perhaps. So the fact that the sea level rise or this unpredictable weather conditions are going to persist and will probably be even more intense in the coming years is not something they anticipate or they understand. And it's quite difficult to also bring that conversation into the process. So it's always about, the struggles that they're going through, and then to bring the different design ideas to them, and then to talk about it. And quite often, it's not just about architects going and talking. That's one issue. I mean, we are constantly in engagement where we bring the entire communities together, sit together, discussion, not just about housing, but also livelihood and the changes that are happening in the livelihoods also. But at the same time, I think it's important to have other multidisciplinary approach, like a lot of anthropological questions that come about when we are working with people, why people behave in a certain way, why is, very basic questions that come to mind where we are not, let's say, have the knowledge. So anthropologists, sociologists, geographers, climate experts, I think there is an important element where we all come together and discuss, and also at the same time having partners. So we cannot work what we are doing until unless we have partners like NGOs and humanitarian agencies who are actually the main focal people who has been working on the ground for many, many years. And they have created a connection. And based on their connection, then we are able to foster this new connection that we are trying to build. So I think there's a lot of engagement, not only with the stakeholders, but also all the other agencies and scholars and knowledge that we have. So it's a lot of combination and a lot of conversation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I found that in my practice too. So another similar sort of question that I'll just build a little bit on before going back to Henk is the Kudibari homes or houses that your team constructed or helped the stakeholders to construct. A viewer's wondering if the modular homes were adapted in various ways by the families based on their needs, and whether you learned anything from the families and how they use the space and the structure that you were then able to incorporate into the next iteration of the design strategy.
Right. Yes, that's a very good question. One thing is that when we developed this idea of Kudibari, we had a lot of issues in mind, that it has to be easily dismantleable and then easily easy to reconstruct. It needs to be lightweight. It has to use local material, and all of those issues. But at the same time, I think one of the major important issue that was constantly in our mind was that we should not design anything that is different from, let's say, the local vernacular that people are used to. It's a cultural construct that's in their psyche. So the moment you give them something completely new, it will not be accepted. So it was very important for us to keep to the local vernacular. So that's why the structure is very sturdy. But at the same time, once you build a building, it looks quite similar to the local vernacular. So it was easy to accept for people. But at the same time, when we've built several of these houses now in many different locations, one thing we've seen now that we go back, we're constantly monitoring how people are using it. We see a lot of different ways of adapting to it, especially in the areas where there is a lot of flooding, especially now in last few months ago, we had this enormous flood where the Kudibari structure really proved to be an important element where people were able to save themselves, not only themselves, but also their neighbors. And we see that they have made extensions like adding a kitchen to the house. They have tried to incorporate the windows in a much more better way where they can bring in air, but at the same time, we had this idea that there is such a beautiful view, maybe a larger window would be nice, where they feel that they need more privacy in many ways. So a lot of people would suggest that it should be maybe one side closed. So there are all these little issues that, as architects, we are more used to fantasizing in certain ways how we would like to live. But when you go on the ground, you see that people have other needs, social and, especially privacy wise. So we see a lot of little changes that they want to make to the structure. They add new structures to that. So it's kind of a growing thing. It's more like a small nucleus that you've planted, and then you see that how the entire how the formation is kind of taking over by itself. So we've seen a lot of different changes, and definitely it informs our next projects that we will be building or we're building. We do take a lot of information, especially on social, cultural aspect. When you go and monitor how people actually use it, then a lot of new understanding develops, and that we try to incorporate in the designs.
That's excellent. And I think that what you're speaking of there is really the sort of robustness and a customizability that is so important in policy frameworks as well. So just drawing another link back to what Henk was talking about at slightly different scales. So thank you for that. I think I'll turn that same question over to Henk now. The original question I was asking about the diversity of stakeholders. What thoughts do you have on engaging diverse stakeholders, and particularly on the challenges and opportunities of scaling up from small conversations in working groups to broader coalition building or systemic change?
And thanks, Nick, for asking this. It's so close to not only my heart, but my professional conviction that this is the way how we should approach these challenging issues. And as Marina already addressed, including all, of course, it's not easy. Inclusivity is a verb. It is something that you actively need to do and engage with, and it doesn't stop either. Inclusivity starts from the beginning all the way to it never stops. And I think this leaving no one behind motto the UN tries to address in its overarching principle is key, but putting that in practice is very tough. We know in a world that is becoming more divided, it is easy. It happens. You retreat within your own group, within your own silo, and then partnering, building coalitions across those sectors, across those silos, across formal and informal or constituencies is even harder, but so key. In my work, working on water around the world, being it on the ground in Chennai in India, or in Bangladesh in Khulna, or now in Monterrey in Mexico, or all the way up to the UN level, this is of critical importance. Bringing in the voices of all, the young, the very young, women, indigenous, the most marginalized, as well as the institutional voices, private sector, public sector of all layers and levels, and across sector. So inclusivity, therefore, also really is about how you are going to bring together a comprehensive, more holistic approach of those voices. And that is what I so much like about working on water. Water is such a cross-cutting issue. It doesn't matter where you start, wherever in the world. It always touches upon most vulnerable, but also institutional, ones that are responsible, private sector, depending on water, in urban or rural settings. The moment water comes to the table, you need a large table for all those stakeholders to engage. But then it comes to how you organize that. And I think this is the program I set up in Asia, I talked about in my lecture, Water as Leverage, really started from those communities up, really figuring out who are the key players, community actors, individuals, as well as organized NGOs, schools, but also then community organizers, NGOs that were active, very local, connecting those voices to international or regional organizations and professional stakeholders that could chime in, not because they are rooted there and grounded in those communities, but because they know everything about the water and climate and urban-related challenges. It's this mix. When I worked in New York, I always said to my team, the door is always open. You're never too late. That is a challenge in organizing, because it means that while you're in the midst of organizing your process, all of a sudden we would say, oh, it has to be different. We have to go there and there. We have to include her or him, or this organization. And you have to show and practice what you preach on the willingness and be flexible. And, you could say almost say resilient and in the way you organize it, as much as in the outcome of those of that organization. So I couldn't agree more, but I also, acknowledge that it's tough, and it exactly that toughness that because of that gets a lot of critique, and therefore we bypass inclusivity. And that is, well, I don't have a very nice word. It's stupid. If we leave out the voices of all, you end up with solutions that don't tick those boxes, don't make the connections, and therefore are not addressing equity, equality, sustainability, and resiliency. So you think you go easy way forward, alone or in silos, but what you end up actually makes you more vulnerable and is not addressing the challenges of those communities and in the regions that are so vulnerable. So inclusivity is the only guarantee to come up with solutions that matter on the long run.
Excellent. I completely agree. And I also really appreciate your image or your message of the door always being open. And that's not just because it's sort of an architectural feature, but I'm thinking of what Marina was talking about in terms of the modularity and what we often call in architecture, especially in housing, the malleability of the actual dwellings, that they can be changed, that things are not set in stone, that flexibility is key to success. And of course, as policymakers, as designers, as engineers, I'm sure we're all familiar with talking in terms of upstream and downstream challenges.
So it's an adaptive capacity, not only of the structures, but also of the process. And the thing you alluded to in your question was also the coalition part. Building coalitions of the willing is not looking for your like-minded. It's not about finding friends. It's about finding as many voices as you can get. And these type of coalitions are not only important in the part of the process where you identify needs, where you identify vulnerabilities and opportunities, and design and co-design and collaborate and develop those solutions that really add value. It is as important in seeing these solutions through, the ownership that you create, not in a singular manner, but across sectors and silos in society, because that level of ownership makes sure that whatever you implement succeeds, one, but also can be replicated and scaled. And this is the thing we're lacking. We find sometimes the opportunity to do something amazing, and then because we haven't created this ownership, these type of coalitions, and to make sure that the solutions we implement can be replicated and scale. And then we have one, pilot, and then nothing. But we need scale and replication for the solutions of the future. And I think that is a critical aspect of that too. Yes.
Excellent. I agree. I wonder if I can return to Marina now along similar lines, and since both of your work speaks of and entails collaboration and interaction with such a complex mix of different stakeholders at different scales, we're curious. We've received a question from a viewer on how you bring about convergence of diverse goals and needs. Or to frame the question a little bit differently, what are the major obstacles in bringing together various perspectives? And then as a sort of bringing it home to where we're based here in Montreal in Canada, or in North America on Turtle Island, what suggestions do you have for professionals working to apply the design processes that you've described to our work here? So I'll ask you, Marina, maybe to respond to that question first.
Right. Well, what we've seen, I mean, the Kudibari project, let's say, for one particular, that's a response to the geographically and climatic challenging locations. This is absolutely for people who are, marginalized to the point where they live off the land. And these are people who doesn't have any place to live in, or maybe in a very, in a very basic way. So this is an answer to that. But not all the locations has the same kind of issues. There are different things also, like especially in the mature deltas where people already have houses to live in. Let's say their concerns are different. Their issues are quite different than what we are suggesting with a marginalized population in the climate crisis area, where again, this whole idea of community engagement, and through that designing something where, especially in the slums, urban slums, let's say, or even in the smaller town where people are living in certain areas, there is also where we work with locals, and through community engagement, where you see there is a need for social upgradation in terms of housing, but they don't have the skill, the necessity skill that requires. So they will build with brick, let's say, a house. But the idea of using a brick or bringing a brick building to a proper planning is missing. So, you can combine your engagement with people, again, working through the process. I can probably talk about the process now here, as you were questioning, where we try to engage with the community. We do the design process with them. So the entire design process goes through that. So it starts with mapping of the area where they live. And the mapping process is actually the first way of engaging them. They have an understanding of how maps work, in a way the planning process works. And then after that, we start designing. And when we design, we use models. We ask them to come and work in models. So you see, or you understand their aspirations, the material aspiration, the spatial aspiration, and all of that comes together. And then, it's a process where architects kind of take a very passive role and let the community decide on the different materials and aspects that they want to build with. So aspiration is important. And then through the process, you kind of come up with a design idea. And that's when we start to use the idea of how you can make it within a certain budget, where budget is definitely an important issue, and to maybe, to bring all of that together. And so that's how the entire process starts to work. And in all the work that we do, it's the community who decides. we do not take any decision. It's always them deciding on every single aspect, including choosing of the contractor, choosing of the artisans and the masons, let's say, or even going and buying material, sourcing material. Everything is done by them. So that, you have that sense of ownership, and that's very important to have when you're building for people. So basically, the entire process brings people into focus rather than our intentions or our design abilities. We are there to sort of give them the technical support, the knowledge, and the know-how that we have from our side, but we let the community take the lead. So it's a very community-led development process.
Okay, that's excellent. And so what I'm hearing especially as important are attitudes of humility on the part of the specialists who are accompanying or supporting the local stakeholders. And that includes really important details, I think, around representation, mapping, and the use of models,
right.
and not trying to bring diverse communities of practice into our MO, let's say, of doing work in professional cultures. I think that's a really important theme that resonates. So thank you, Marina. We've heard now about work at different scales with diverse publics, and that's something that we're seeing as a central theme and preoccupation, both in the talks that you've both given and in the responses to the earlier questions. I just wanted to repeat one of the questions that came from our viewers, which Marina just addressed, concerning obstacles to bringing together various perspectives. So we're continuing on this theme of coalition building and many voices. Henk, your work entails collaboration and interaction with many local and global stakeholders. How do you bring about convergence? What are some of the tactics as well as strategies for bringing together diverse perspectives, and perhaps what are the obstacles, and any comments you might be able to bring to us as practitioners here in North America on Turtle Island, as professional engineers, designers, planners, policymakers, etc., would be especially welcome there.
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thanks, Marina, also for your amazing input here and your reflections upon this so important part. The obstacles, I'm not sure, but they're for me they're often clear, and it's vested interests and past practices and policies. It's more or less that we are glued to the past, and we know what we did, but it's uncertain where we're heading, and it means that you see around the world a repetition of these past mistakes instead of a reinventing of that future that we so much need. And that comes with a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty in a world where distrust is growing instead of trust, only makes us even more shy, more scared even of that future that is challenging, dire. And then this is where we find ourselves locked up within our own sectors and silos. And stick to our own practices. So overcoming that vested interest, these these practices of the past, you need different approaches. One, it needs to come with clear understanding. So I addressed it in my talk too. Secretary General Guterres says science and solidarity. Those two really come together. The understanding of the challenges open at the table is of critical importance. So we all have the same information and access to that same information. Solidarity, of course, really making sure that everybody can be part of that process. But then the process itself, it has to be about this safe space, as I called it, this, creating the opportunity that you can come together. That it is not immediately about, hey, you're not right, or I'm going to counter your arguments, and it's about the opposites in society, but it's about, okay, these are the challenges, no matter what, and we can all face them differently. These are the opportunities, and we can all look upon them differently. These are all your different interests, and really make sure that we understand the differences, because those differences are actually amazing. Yeah, this is the fantastic part of our society. We are all different. We are not equals. We all want something else from that new future. But those many voices together make this amazing palette that can help us address the many challenges across, as I say, the Sustainable Development Goals. But creating this safe space, an environment where you start, slowly to build up trust, is of critical importance. And we know there's this saying, trust comes by turtle and leaves by horse. Well, yeah, it's vulnerable. So creating such a safe space and investing in that process is of critical importance. And I think I addressed it too. I said, investing in people comes first. And, in our world, we're very much focused on solutions and projects and interventions. So on the billions of dollars that we need to spend on infrastructure. But it's about the millions we spend on our people and our institutions and our informality that builds a level of capacity where we are able to reach out, bring people together, create the opportunity to get to know each other, build a coalition, perhaps of the unwilling that becomes a coalition of the willing, going back and forth. And that demands of, people like me and others, you could say stubbornness, but I would say consistency, continuity, and commitment. Now, consistency, continuity, and commitment not often are key or core assets of government. Politics, left and right, up and down, private sector, the same. But consistency, continuity, and commitment to the process, not to the outcome, but the process is of critical importance. If you stick in organizing that capacity, in organizing an enabling environment, you build an enabling environment with all. If you're able to create that safer space where you bring those many voices together, then you have to continue to do that. This is never a one-off. This is something you always have to do. I remember working for the Obama administration. It took us a long time to bring the communities together with the experts and with the governments, because there was a lot of distrust in that region, especially among vulnerable communities. And at the final presentations of the solutions, and then of course the follow-up, it was the Mayor's race, the community leader from the good old Lower East Side that said, Rebuild by Design made us sit on the same side of the table. Making sure that we created a process of partnership. But she also said, but we can easily sit back on the other side again. It's trust that you build that you really have to care for. So the process of engagement, of inclusivity, of building capacity, of building these coalitions and creating a safe space should never stop. And I think this is exactly the vulnerability that we see. We want the solution and then we go to something else, where we pilot hop around the world. And with that, we never create this enabling environment. We never capitalize on the little trust that we build, and then it falls apart again. So I think some examples also in the Middle East, in a situation where there are parties that are in real conflict, it is consistency, continuity, and commitment. And of course, it goes back 2 steps and then 3 steps ahead and then 1 step to the. This is not about a turbo process where you say, oh, this is the finish and I'm done. No. This is a rigorous process of engagement and really sticking to that promise that we made. Yes, we will continue to include you. Yes, we will continue to raise your voice. Yes, we will continue to make sure that you are part of the conversation, always at all times, and that it's not about judgment, but it's really about partnerships. And I think that is tough, but the reward you get is, as said, you get the solutions and the outcomes that really are comprehensive and future-proof, sustainable and resilient, that build societies that are more equitable, that are more sustainable and more resilient. And that's exactly what we want. So there is no doubt that this is the way. It only takes time. And we're impatient by nature, perhaps, or by design, processes by design and us by nature. We have to turn that impatience into patience and a stubbornness, for the lack of a better word.
I think those are excellent points, and I really appreciate the emphasis on time and temporality. We often speak in Montreal and in many other circles where there's a lot of public engagement and civil society activity. We speak of the longue durée, the long period of time commitment that is required, both to build trust, but also to maintain trust and to keep conversations alive and engaged.
And time is your best friend. The moment you do this, you not only build a project, you build a team that can build projects, programs, pipelines. The moment you focus on the project, you have one result, and then before you know it, it falls apart. The moment you focus on the people, you get the opportunity to do whatever you want, to really create a better future. So the choice is so easy, but it's not easy. It's hard done. But the moment you understand this and build a coalition of decision makers that are willing and able to see this through, then you can create partnerships from the ground up that are willing and able to see this through too.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. I wonder if I could switch gears a bit. And here's another question that's coming from a viewer. And it's a question that I will put to you, Marina, and then ask Henk to comment on as well. But basically, if we recognize that decarbonization and clean energy policies, so to speak, are hotly debated, how to actually articulate them and of course implement them. The water energy nexus is often cited in ambiguous ways in these sorts of conversations. So could you identify some important nexus issues that need to be addressed to be able to confront climate change with resilience?
Good question. I don't know if I have the answer for it, though. The way I see it, especially in our context in Bangladesh, we are facing an enormous amount of energy crisis. We have, this whole electricity issue has turned into quite a difficult situation where, especially in the villages where we work, there's hardly any. Maybe for 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, you get electricity, and then there's none whatsoever. So basically, solar power is still one of the major things that they have. These solar panels, and their need for electricity is very little in that sense, especially in the housing sector. For the other like industrial parts, there is government who's providing electricity, but at the same time, we are very much still dependent on gas. There's a nuclear power plant that's being built now, but during this crisis of the war, things have kind of stopped and not really going forward at this point, or probably stuck for a while. I don't know. It probably will take up again pretty soon. But it's a crisis that we've always had, electricity, because of the enormous rivers that we have, but the current that we have are not enough to generate the way electricity has been produced with using water. So that's a crisis. And the thing is how we can probably reduce our dependency on this power is also something we need to look at. That's how I see it, especially when you go to the village and you see that people have been living there for all these years without electricity, or they have been able to just improvise. To be able to plug their mobile phones is enough. To have one light, one fan is probably just enough to live a day by. And to have enough natural elements to protect you from the heat and the wind and the winter. So I don't know. It's probably also important that we try to bring to a compromise or to kind of adapt to a situation where we are not so dependent on the artificial means of living, rather than how can we naturalize in certain ways. I think that's probably my answer, because I really don't have any answer to this.
That makes complete sense, and it's a good sort of a reminder of how we can't take for granted what might be considered in a context like Montreal, for instance, the perennity or the constant availability of power, and of course the absence of round-the-clock electricity is something that engenders innovation and adaptation, which are all key to resilience. So I think that's very encouraging, very inspiring, a good example of where we can all learn. So I'll turn that same question over to Henk, maybe. Henk, we've heard from Marina on limited access to electricity in many of the contexts where she and her team have been doing their work. And that includes the historic absence of hydro or other cheap sources of energy, having made it a very different kind of question, this water energy nexus that I think is so central to the policy work that you've talked to us about. Where Marina refers to having just enough power to charge the smartphone for a household is very different from the energy-hungry ways of life that, for instance, I would associate with all of the NATO member countries. It's certainly something that we're concerned about here in Montreal and more generally in Canada. So I ask you then, what additional comments might you have on water energy nexus issues to address and confront climate change with resilience? I might ask you to frame your response in the light of the very broad audience we know is with us tonight, from students to industry professionals to policymakers to everyday citizens who might be very well-informed citizens, might be more non-specialist citizens. So in other words, if there were one message you would want our audience to take away from your talk today, what would it be?
Well, thanks, Nick. Very complicated question. One message, no water, no energy. So water is a little bit underestimated in this, but we saw it just recently here in Europe with nuclear power plants and no cooling water. You immediately have a challenge, not only in the safety and security of our community, but also in energy security. But it's only one aspect. If we look at the broader context of this water energy nexus, we of course look at climate, and moving from fossil fuel to renewable in the more sustainable way of energy. It is about using less energy, which does mean having a smaller water footprint, which in itself already is a pillar under sustainable development, as well as moving to those renewable energy sources that really have a dependency on water, direct or indirect. So water is like a foundational layer or foundational pillar under energy security, and energy security is what we need. The other way around too, looking at wastewater treatment plants, getting water out of the ground or desalination, making sure water is at your house, at your industry, at your community, energy is used. And then there's a mix. So it's not a simple one-on-one relationship. If we provide solar panels to fetch water from the ground instead of oil-driven generators that are more costly because you have to pay for the diesel or the gasoline every time, and it's polluting, so it's bad for your health. So we replace something that's bad for the world and bad for your health as an individual with something that actually has a different impact. All of a sudden, it turns out that in the places where water is really scarce and there's a lot of sun, those pumps can be on the whole day. So it's not a one-off. It doesn't mean that with energy security, with solar-powered water pumps, all of a sudden it means water security. It really demands intelligence. There's not a relationship one-on-one between water supply and provision and energy demand. While energy is needed to get water, it doesn't mean that with energy, all of a sudden you're not water scarce anymore. No, actually it's the opposite. And with the increase of climate change, water scarcity is only increasing faster, undermining energy security, but undermining security writ large. And this is a different part of the equation. And then we look at the bigger spectrum. The water energy nexus is a foundational layer on the food security. And that's what we see nowadays in the current time with more geopolitical challenges. The energy market is challenged by geopolitics. The food market is challenged by geopolitics. The water market is non-existent. While energy and food are commodities, water is a human right. So it's not an equal partner in this nexus. So there are dependencies and interdependencies, and it's a foundational pillar on their security, water. At the same time, it's not a commodity. There's no price on water. If you're lucky, services are paid and substitute for the most vulnerable, but most of the times the rich pay nothing and the poor pay 5 to 50 times as much for that. So, and then getting water by truck or having to walk hours a day, not being able to contribute to their communities and societies. And often the women and the girls are the ones that are facing that challenge first and foremost. So while there is a direct relationship, there's also a big difference between those two. And last, perhaps, water does not play a critical role in these commodities and in food security and energy security. It is at large creating the opportunity for mitigation, carbon sinks with our wetlands, nature, and our oceans, as well as adaptation, building resiliency. And water scarcity is only building up because of consumption, economic development, and therefore the use also of energy and food. So the commodity aspects directly plays into water scarcity. So understanding this complexity is of critical importance. I said this before, this understanding will help drive where a water energy nexus can actually help energy security, water security, and with that also security writ large. But without that understanding, before you know it, cheaper energy that is sustainable only feeds into more water uncertainty and scarcity. And therefore, while you thought you got it, you end up in a situation that is even worse. So it's a delicate balance, this nexus. If you play it out right, it is amazing. You build more sustainable societies that are healthy and water secure. But if not, the one leads actually to more challenges in the other. So I think a little bit of the explanation in the differences, but also in the opportunities, especially in the current times where climate change plays out hard in our societies, and we will be dependent much more on sustainable energy sources. And of course, hydropower plays in this, really thinking about an energy source as well, a not easy energy source too, because a dam and a river is an opportunity for energy, but at the same time, a big challenge for that river. So engineering your way forward is not an easy way. It's not an easy road or river, you could say. So many complexities that come with its nexus, but it's definitely a way to look into sustainable development for a more resilient and equitable future.
Excellent, thank you. And I agree it was a complicated question from our audience, but I think that you provided us with a very stimulating and exciting response that opens up more opportunities for discussion, debate, and of course the work that we are doing at TISED and that many coalitions are forming around. So this is
yes. Water provides many resources. We have tidal energy, we have even energy that comes from the differences between fresh water and salt water. Even the current provides us with. So water really is also a source of energy itself. It's a platform to use when it comes to renewable energy. So many opportunities, but it's a different it's a different player in this whole spectrum. And again, reiterating the importance of understanding that complexity, then we can benefit from its added value to this approach.
I would agree. And I hope that some of our candidates for our Quebec election are eventually going to hear this, because we're in the midst of this conversation. And of course, Quebec has a history in many different ways of taking advantage of our ample water and hydroelectric power sources, but also in terms of doing things that have downstream impacts that can be problematic. So I want to bring our conversation more to a synthesis. And I think we've seen many examples from both of you, both in terms of the work that you've done and propositions or recommendations for what we should all be doing in our various capacities. It's of course sometimes frustrating to be doing this kind of work, And we can have a tendency to maybe talk more about obstacles, barriers, and so on. I have heard a great deal, which is hopeful and enthusiastic here. But I wonder if maybe you could both encapsulate or reiterate what gives you hope. And in both of your talks, you really use this as a frame. So maybe I'll start with you, Marina, on that. What are the key things that give you reasons to be cheerful and optimistic, and that encourage you to get up every day and continue doing the excellent work?
Well, I think hope is our driving force. I mean, that's probably the most important part of being a human, that the fact that you can hope against all hopes, which keeps us going in a way. So I think I see a lot of enthusiasm, awareness among the younger generation who are aware of the issues that are pressing of our time. The climate issues, the disparities. When I teach, I encounter students constantly asking and inquiring about these issues. So this awareness is important. And the fact that we are in conversation about how to tackle this, I think, is an enormous hope by itself, because we were not doing that 5 years ago. So the fact that we understand that there is a need of conversation, there are needs of bringing change in the way we live, and to be prepared for, unforeseen, is, I think, important. And that's what brings hope to me every single day. I think a lot of energy comes from the fact that I see a lot of conversation happening around it. I see a lot of young architects becoming more engaged, more interested in fighting these issues and tackling them, and to bring about a certain change in our way of practice in architecture and in the built environment. So basically, that's what keeps me going.
That's excellent. Sustaining hope and sustaining mobilization, I think, are very interwoven and are very much ideas that can be described in terms of the scalability question that we've come back to in so many ways tonight in both of your talks. I would like to thank you, Marina, for your for the very exciting responses and ideas that you've shared with us in these questions.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolutely wonderful to converse. Thank you.
So we've seen in tonight's discussions, both in the presentations from Marina and from Henk, and from these very exciting exchanges in the Q&A, many examples from both of you of what we should be doing. And we know that it can be frustrating. We know that in many ways the challenges are awesome, and they may seem to be, in some cases, insurmountable. And we tend to focus an awful lot on barriers and obstacles and frustrations, etc. I've heard lots myself tonight that is exciting and reasons to be cheerful and optimistic. But I wonder if I could ask you, Henk, to reiterate some of the things that give you hope. And I'll just remind you that one of the things Marina talked about is how inspired she is by hearing conversations that are taking place now that weren't taking place a few years ago, conversations that lead to action. Young practitioners orienting themselves and the kinds of work that they seek to do in gaining their livelihoods, in taking on these challenges, which are really about the survival of humankind, I think. And of course, this operational question that you've referred to, I think, several times on sustaining mobilization, building coalitions of perhaps the unwilling and becoming the willing. So you remain optimistic. Tell us again what gives you hope, especially based on what you've done and seen in your work across the globe.
Well, thanks, Nick. It's a great question. I'm way, I'm the opposite of the cynic. So the glass is not only half full, it's full. That doesn't mean it's not challenging. Eh? And I think there's a difference between becoming cynical in a world that is, more challenging perhaps every day, and embracing the opportunities. And I couldn't agree more with Marina the young and the youth, the activists and the activism that comes with that, that really helps to build this collective voice towards a better future. So yes, I take inspirations in working with youth, with students that really dare to embrace their uncertainties and see them as an opportunity. I also get, knowing that, a lot of inspiration from the practices that we are actually doing around the world. So many great things happen. And of course, it's nowhere enough. Scale and replication lack, as I said. But at the same time, using those best examples, those better practices with the young and the youth, but also the leadership that is willing and able to take this forward and really put their weight, their political, their leadership, their private sector, their financial weight behind it to say, okay, if this works and it's inspiring all, we're going to scale and replicate. And I know we see not enough of this, but it is on us. And I still know that if we have partners like you and others that are willing and able to take a bigger step forward and are daring to risk, to risk and not be afraid of that uncertainty, where we are able to do this. At the same time, we have to be realistic. IPCC is clear. And the Climate Change and Land Report of 2019 made it very clear: 99% of global investments increase climate change and make us more vulnerable. So we celebrate on that 1%, but there is an opportunity for scaling and replication. 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 16. It is really this opportunity for that. And right now, perhaps because the urgency is building up, because insecurity on the geopolitical scale and the global scale is only increasing, that activist voice, not only among activists and young, but also among institutions, private sector, financiers that take more serious risks and see more serious opportunities. There is now, I'm not saying now or never, but now at least a time and a capacity and a willingness to take this on. Of course, proof of the pudding is in the eating. We have to make sure that it starts to work. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy. But knowing that with these partnerships, these coalitions we're building, the amazing opportunity we have with the insights, the data, the knowledge, as well as the level of commitment of organizations like yours and ours and others, and the people like Marina and others to, around the world, to continue to build these type of coalitions, I'm hopeful. To the very personal matter, I get hope from, the young. And it can be a girl in Samarang that, as I presented in my presentation, that has a cap that says she wants to be a doctor because she wants to take care of people and believes in the world, but that's worthwhile, all the way to, I was in Monterrey, in Mexico, where students are rallying behind this new innovation agenda, a school in Chile on the Elqui River Basin. Across the world, we find communities that are in dire need, that face many challenges, more challenges in the context of climate, refugee crisis, a pandemic, and on top, that show hope. And if they show hope, we can't be arrogant. We have to embrace that hope. We have to build on that hope, capitalize on that hope, and continue to invest in people. And I think this is where we benefit most and where the inspiration comes. And of course, I do believe in technology. I do believe in science. I do believe in institutional capacity. And that is like a necessity, but the hope comes from the people, for me, at least.
That's very exciting. And the convergence of science, solidarity, culture, technology, social practice, these are all central messages that I'm hearing from both of you, Henk and Marina, tonight, and I hope that they resonate with our audience members. So thank you so much, Henk, and thank you, of course, Marina, as well, for your thoughtful responses on the fly to questions that came from our audience, and also that we within the TISED steering committee for the event have articulated.
Thanks so much, Nick and Marina. It was great to be part.
And with that, we will conclude our evening. It's been very stimulating, and I hope very exciting for all of you. It only remains for me to thank our two speakers for joining us tonight on behalf of the Trottier Institute for Sustainability in Engineering and Design. To everyone joining us virtually tonight, we hope to continue this important conversation going forward. We also hope to see you in person at our next TISED event. Please do visit our website at mcgill.ca/TISED, where you can sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on all of our activities. I would like to thank the event organizers, TISED team, the Institut de l'Énergie Trottier at the École Polytechnique de Montréal, and of course to McGill University. Of course, our deepest thanks must go to the Trottier family for their leadership and generosity in supporting our institute and so many other important initiatives at McGill and elsewhere. I bid you good night.